So, you know Tamiya RC cars, right? Legends of the hobby. Think about icons like the frog.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. A shade's instantly recognizable to anyone who was around RC back in the 80s.
Right. But here's a little thing that always kind of caught my eye. In Japan, where Tamiya is actually from, that exact same car, the frog. Well, it's sometimes been called the mighty frog.
Ah,
It's a small difference, sure, but it makes you wonder, is that just like a one-off? Or is there more to it?
that detail about the frog, yeah, that's actually a perfect starting point because it hints at something
Yeah.
bigger. This whole question, are there other Tamiya cars with different names in Japan compared to, well, everywhere else?
Exactly.
It suggests there might be a pattern, maybe a story behind the branding choices.
Precisely. So, okay, that's going to be our mission for this deep dive. We've been digging through a stack of sources, articles, forum discussions, hobbyist research, basically looking at Tamiya's branding across different markets. We want to find out, are there confirmed cases of different names? What are they? And I guess the big question is why? Why did Tamiya do this? And what does it all mean for you listening in, especially if you're a hobbyist or a collector?
Yeah, we're sort of pulling back the curtain on these trans-Pacific titles, as some of the sources call them. It's really exploration into how Tamiya named some of their most famous kits and why those names sometimes change depending on where you bought them.
Okay, let's jump right in then. Were there other Tamiya cars besides the Frog, maybe, with different names specifically for the Japanese market?
The sources confirm it. Yes, absolutely. The Frogs its Kit 58041 is a key example,
Mm,
especially its Japanese re-release Kit 58354, which definitely used the Mighty Frog name.
yeah.
That's Na in Japanese.
Mighty Frog. Okay.
But yeah, it's far from the only one, particularly when you look at those really beloved early buggies and trucks.
All right, lay it on us. What are some of the classic examples?
Okay, well, take the car most of the world knows as the Super Champ, Kit 58034.
Uh-huh, the Super Champ.
Its original name in Japan was actually Fighting Buggy.
Fighting Buggy. Okay, that's interesting.
And what's really fascinating is when Tamiya re-released it, that was kits 47304 and 84389, they decided to use that original Japanese name, Fighting Buggy, for the global release.
Whoa, hang on. So the original JDM name, Fighting Buggy, became the standard name worldwide for the re-release.
Exactly.
That's a pretty significant choice. Did they do that with others too?
They did, yeah. The Rough Rider kit 580015, another absolute icon.
Yeah, Rough Rider.
It was originally known as Buggy Champ in Japan.
Buggy Champ. Okay.
And just like the Super Champ when they did the re-release, kit 58441, it was branded globally as the Buggy Champ.
Huh. So that's a clear pattern then, honoring the original Japanese domestic market identity when they brought the kits back. But are there cases where they kept the names different, even with the re-release? Like you mentioned the Frog getting the Mighty added just in Japan.
Yes, definitely.
Mm.
The Sand Scorcher gives us a slightly different twist on this. Kit 58016 originally.
Mm-hmm.
The international re-release, Kit 58452, is still called the Sand Scorcher. No change there for most of the world.
Okay.
But in Japan, that exact same re-release kit is named Wagon Off-Roader.
Wagon Off-Roader. Like WAGEN Volkswagen.
Exactly. It points directly to the VW Beetle body it uses. Very descriptive.
Yeah, Wagon Off-Roader. That is very, very descriptive of what the car actually is.
It really is. And we see that kind of descriptive approach again with the original Bruiser.
Yeah.
That's 58048, and the re-release 58519.
The Bruiser, right. The big Toyota truck.
Yeah. Globally, it's Bruiser. Sometimes you'll see Toyota 4X4 pickup, RN36, tacked on.
Mm.
But in Japan, the original name was Toyota Hilux High-Lift.
Ah, okay. Much more specific. Using the full name of the actual truck it's based on.
Precisely. Leveraging that specific Toyota model name, which was, big deal.
Okay, let me see if I've got this straight. To recap the big ones with confirmed distinct JDM names. The Frog, sometimes being Mighty Frog in Japan. Super Champ was originally Fighting Buggy. Rough Rider was originally Buggy Champ. The Sand Scorcher re-release is called Wagon Off-Roader in Japan only. And the original Bruiser was Toyota Hilux High Lift in Japan.
Those are definitely the key confirmed examples that really stand out in the
Yeah.
sources, yeah. And the sources are pretty clear. These distinct names weren't like typos or accidents. They were deliberate choices, marketing decisions.
Okay. So we know these specific different names exist for some icons, but what about, the vast majority of Tamiya kits? They seem to have the same names everywhere, don't they? Is there potential for confusion there?
Yeah, that's a really important point to make just for clarity. While those examples we just ran through had genuinely different core names for the Japanese domestic market, The much more common practice at Tamiya, overwhelmingly so, is simply taking the English name and writing it phonetically,
Yeah.
using Japanese characters, specifically katakana.
Right. Katakana, that's the script they use for foreign words. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're just writing out the English sound using Japanese letters.
Exactly. So for most Tamiya RC cars, the name isn't actually different. It's the same name, just transliterated. The Hornet is Manv. The Grasshopper is Mensho Grosso.
Uh-huh.
The Avante is Abante. Hotshot is Horobasuta.
Okay.
Monster Beetle is Mensutoru. Clodbuster is Kurado Basuta. You get the idea.
So basically, when you see those names written in Japanese, they usually just sound like the English name, maybe with a Japanese accent, pretty much.
Precisely.
Mm-hmm.
And this distinction is actually crucial. The fact that Tamiya chose to create genuinely different names like Fighting Buggy or Toyota Hilux Highlift for those specific, mostly early models, it makes them really noteworthy. They stand out because they deviated from their standard practice.
Okay, that's right. So there was a standard practice, just write the English name in katakana. But for a select few, they went out of their way to create unique Japanese names. So what was driving those specific decisions? What factors were behind names like Mighty Frog or Fighting Buggy?
Well, linking this back to what the sources suggest, there were likely several influences playing together. One pretty significant factor seems to be targeted marketing, specifically for the home crowd in Japan.
Yeah.
Adding Mighty to the Frog or calling the Super Champ the Fighting Buggy. Maybe that was seen as giving them a bit more localized punch. Made them sound more exciting or competitive for that specific market at that time.
Kind of like giving them cooler, more descriptive nicknames that would resonate better in Japan back then.
Potentially, yeah. On the other hand, using those really descriptive names like Wagon Off-Roader or Toyota Hilux Highlift, that seems tied much more directly to licensing and leveraging brand recognition. In Japan, the connection to the actual Toyota Hilux truck or the Volkswagen Beetle was a major selling point.
Right.
So using those specific recognizable names in the JDM just made perfect sense from a domestic marketing and probably a licensing perspective.
So thinking about the Bruiser, was using the name Bruiser internationally maybe a way to simplify things? Perhaps avoid potential licensing complexities across lots of different countries compared to explicitly calling it the Toyota Hilux.
The sources do suggest that licensing complexity across various regions definitely played a role in Tamiya's branding over the years. You even see it sometimes with the removal of specific manufacturer badges on some later re-releases. It hints at how carefully they manage these details globally. So yeah, it's plausible that a more generic, punchy name like Bruiser gave Tamiya more flexibility worldwide compared to the very specific Toyota Hilux Highlift.
Right. And what about that trend we noticed with the re-releases? Super Champ becoming Fighting Buggy globally, Rough Rider becoming Buggy Champ globally. Is that part of like an evolving brand strategy?
It certainly looks that way. Re-releases give Tamiya a chance to sort of revisit the whole legacy of these kits, don't they?
Yeah.
Adopting the original JDM names globally could be seen as a way to maybe unify the history, acknowledge what a lot of dedicated fans already knew were the original names, and maybe lean into the perceived coolness or historical weight of those specific Japanese titles within the hardcore enthusiast community. It gives the re-releases a really distinct tie back to their roots.
It's almost like they're saying, okay, the world knew it as the Super Champ for years, but this is its true original name.
Exactly. Although, as that Sandscorcher Wagon Off-Roader example shows us, they don't always unify the names. Sometimes they'll maintain that regional distinction if both names have strong recognition or historical meaning in their respective markets.
And we probably shouldn't ignore the whole cultural aspect, right? That sort of English is cool factor in Japan.
Oh, absolutely. That's a really significant piece of this puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
For decades, using English words and names often carried this certain modern, fashionable, maybe even aspirational vibe in Japanese marketing and culture. This cultural inclination probably explains why the vast majority of Tamiya RC names were just kept in English and transliterated into katakana. Names like Hornet or Hotshot just sounded cool on their own in that context.
So most of the time, they just leveraged the inherent appeal of English names, which makes those cases where they didn't do that, where they deliberately went and created a distinct Japanese name like Mighty Frog or Fighting Buggy, even more fascinating, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
They must have had a specific reason not to just use the English name in those instances.
Precisely. Those specific JDM names seem to have been chosen for strategic reasons, whether it's for marketing impact, maybe licensing clarity in Japan, or leveraging descriptive qualities of the model itself. They stand out because they went against the more common, easier path of simple transliteration.
Okay, so we've established that, yes, distinct JDM names definitely exist for some really iconic models. And these were influenced by a mix of things. Targeted marketing, licensing deals, branding strategies that changed over time, cultural factors, and sometimes they intentionally broke from their standard practice of just transliterating the English names. So what does all this mean for us, for the hobbyists and collectors listening?
Well, I think this level of detail just adds immense depth and, frankly, fun to the hobby. For collectors especially, understanding these name variations often coupled with differences in box art, maybe even subtle parts changes, sometimes it's all part of the thrill, isn't it? Researching and identifying vintage kits versus re-releases or JDM versions versus expert versions, it often requires really engaging with the community, digging into that shared knowledge base.
It's kind of like solving a little historical puzzle. You often need that collective wisdom, that community knowledge to really navigate it all.
It's exactly. Websites, forums, old catalogs, they become these vital archives for documenting all these little nuances. Knowing whether you're looking at an original Japanese box that says Fighting Buggy versus, say, a later global re-release box that also says Fighting Buggy, that's part of the granular knowledge that enthusiasts really get into.
Yeah, I can see how it could also be a bit confusing maybe if you're newer to vintage Tamiya and you suddenly hear someone talking about a buggy champ when you've only ever known the Rough Rider.
Absolutely. And that really highlights how much this corner of the hobby relies on that shared passion and all the accumulated knowledge that gets passed down through the community. These details are preserved and explained by really dedicated fans.
Okay, so looking back at this deep dive then, we've definitely seen that beyond just the famous Mighty Frog example. Tamiya deliberately used distinct Japanese domestic market names for several other iconic early RC cars. We're talking the Super Champ being Fighting Buggy, the Rough Rider as Buggy Champ, the Sandscorcher re-release getting called Wagon Off-Roader in Japan, and the original Bruiser being the Toyota Hilux Highlift there.
And crucially, these weren't just random. They seem to have been calculated decisions, driven by factors like trying to hit the right note in domestic marketing, leveraging specific licensing opportunities in Japan, evolving global branding strategies, which sometimes meant embracing that original JDM name for re-releases later on, and also navigating that cultural landscape where English names were generally cool, but sometimes, just sometimes, a unique Japanese name had a stronger, more specific impact.
Right. So understanding these naming variations, it's not just trivia, is it? It adds this whole other layer of appreciation for the history of these models and maybe the strategic thinking behind Tamiya's global rollouts over the years. It's these kinds of details, really, that make researching and collecting Tamiya kits so endlessly engaging. And often, like you said, it requires you to tap into that wealth of community knowledge out there.
Which, it raises an interesting final thought to leave you with. These trans-specific titles, these different names on boxes. They're really far more than just different words. You can almost see them as these small, deliberate artifacts of Tamiya's whole journey. They reflect bits of cultural exchange, shifts in marketing strategy across different eras and different markets. And they even reflect that renowned Tamiya attention to detail, which clearly extends beyond just the engineering of the model itself, right down to how it's presented, how it's introduced to the world. The names themselves, it turns out, tell a remarkably rich story, don't they?